Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Challenger's tutorial on handling customer baggage. My name is Lauren Pragoff. I'm the Vice President for Effortless Experience here at Challenger. And today I will be taking you through a few different concepts around the idea of handling customer baggage. So just as we dive in, I'd love to start by setting some expectations on what we'll be going through during our time together today. So first, we'll be talking a little bit about what is customer baggage. This may be a new concept to many of you. We'll also get into why it matters. So what's the big deal when it comes to customer baggage? And once we've covered those things, we'll then move into talking about how do I spot it? So how can you identify customer baggage? And then what do you do about it? So how can I handle customer baggage? Before we dive into any of those questions, however, I think it's important to take a step back and remember why it's so crucial for us to get customer service right. Why is it important that we make sure every single service interaction we have is as good as it can be? We can think about this through the lens of risk. And so just to break it down for us all here, let's pretend that the service organization receives about 1 million calls each year. Now, try as we may, not all 1 million of those calls are going to go according to plan. You may have a bad day, the customer may have a bad day. Some issues are just more complex than others. Needless to say, we are not going to have perfect performance on all 1 million calls. Let's say about 25% of those calls go poorly. So 250,000 negative customer experiences. Now, generally speaking, when we think about word of mouth, what we know is that customers tell, on average, about 10 people about a negative service experience. So this is talking to friends or family members, coworkers, neighbors about those bad experiences. And so now it's not just those 250,000 customers that have that negative perception, it's actually 2.5 million people, both customers and potential customers, who have that negative perception of your organization. What's interesting, however, is that most customers actually don't talk to people directly anymore. They use social media, and the math gets a lot worse when you factor in social media. So instead of telling 10 people, customers are now reaching on average about 100 people with every single one of their social media posts when it comes to that negative service interaction. So now, instead of 2.5 million, you're at 25 million people who have had now that negative perception of your organization based on a poor service experience that maybe they didn't even have. So the stakes are high. It's important to get things right. And we frequently hear from service leaders, well, how can we improve the quality of that live service interaction? How do we diminish the percentage of our calls and emails and web chats that don't go well? We would say that actually we need to shift our focus a little bit. It's not just about focusing on what happens during that specific service interaction. Instead, let's think bigger picture, because what actually drives the customer's assessment of their interaction with you includes a lot of other stuff. So it could be things like their past service experiences, maybe not even with your organization, but with other organizations that may have provided both negative or positive customer service. And that's put this customer into a predisposition on what they think they're going to encounter with you. It could be having to do with the relationship with the company. So a customer may feel like, you know, I've been a customer of yours for 25 years and I expect a certain level of service in return when I contact you. Or Perhaps the customer is just having a bad day. They are in a bad mood, and that is going to influence their disposition when they are interacting with you. So there are a lot of different things that go into that broader context around the interaction itself. So it's not just the interaction. And what we've done is really taken a look at how does this break down? So how much of the interaction is influencing a customer's assessment of that overall experience, and how much of it is this other stuff? Interestingly, what we found is that the live service interaction, so when the point from which the customer contacts you to the point that you say goodbye, only accounts for 47% of the things that influence the way a customer feels about that interaction overall. Less than half. In fact, 53% are all about those pre-interaction factors. These are things that happen before you even enter the picture, and they have a disproportionate influence on the way a customer perceives the entire experience. And it's just the things that we were talking about on the previous page. It's their perception of your company's service capabilities. It's their perceived value of themselves to you and of you to them. It could be that they've had to contact you multiple times about the same issue. It could be that they've had to contact you multiple times about different issues. All of that rolls up under the category or the theme of customer baggage. Now, it's interesting to think about customer baggage. It's kind of like relationship baggage or emotional baggage. And it's probably not surprising when I tell you that 92% of customers have baggage. So because there are so many different types of baggage, it's extremely likely that almost everyone you are talking to, all of those customers that you interact with on a day-to-day basis, have some form of baggage. Now, baggage can be a little bit scary, right? So it's not something that we always want to address head on. We may hear a customer say something that might indicate that they have baggage, but frequently it can feel a little bit like poking a sleeping bear. Why would we want to open that can of worms? And because of that, it's not surprising when we hear that customers say only 23% of reps are actually acknowledging baggage. So on 77% of interactions, reps are ignoring the baggage that customers are expressing or that the rep can see through various information sources. And that's what we're here today to talk about, is why it's okay to acknowledge that baggage and why it's actually going to improve your outcomes instead of making them worse. So before we get into some of the details on how to do this, let me give you an example of what this looks like in action and just how much of an impact handling customer baggage can have on the experience itself. So we'll start with a customer service scenario. And you'll see the situation across the top of the screen here. You've ordered a tablet, so an iPad or similar device online, and you're having problems with the battery. The battery charge is going down way too fast. You call customer service to try to get the issue resolved. Now, for background, this is your baggage. You've had multiple contacts with the company about this same issue, but it is still not resolved. And this is an actual scenario that we used in our research. We conducted a customer survey, and we gave half of our customer survey respondents this response. This is kind of a typical rep response to this situation. Thank you for your purchase. I understand you're having a problem with your battery. Let's start from the beginning by going to the settings section to make sure you're not using any feature that's draining your battery more quickly than normal. So this rep is acknowledging, thank you for doing business with us. I hear what your issue is. You're having trouble with the battery. And now I'm going to start through my checklist of troubleshooting and how do we solve this problem. Does not necessarily, however, acknowledge the customer's baggage of having to contact the company multiple times. The other half of our survey respondents received this second answer, rep response B. In this response, the rep is practicing baggage handling. The rep says, "Thanks for your purchase. I understand you're having problems with the battery." So it starts exactly the same as the first one. Now the rep gets into the baggage handling though. They say, "According to our system, it looks like you've called several times about this. Can you tell me what you've tried already and what has or has not worked to preserve the battery life? Then we'll take it from there instead of repeating stuff you've already tried." So in both situations, the reps are starting off the same, but that second rep is really kind of acknowledging, "Hey, I realize that you've been trying to solve this problem for a while. Why don't you tell me what you've tried and we'll go from there?" It's a small and subtle change to the way that they are acknowledging this customer's experience, but it has a major impact on the way the customer feels. And that's what we're going for here. In fact, the customers who got that second response, the baggage handling response, rated the quality of their service experience 98% higher than the customers who received that first response. The customers who received the second response also rated their customer effort 84% lower than those who received that first response. Now, baggage handling, and quite frankly, a lot of the customer experience in general, is truly in the eye of the beholder. So sometimes it's helpful to think about the way you're trying to make the customer feel. And here's what we're going for. Here's what we would want that customer to say, having had that rep response with the baggage handling. Having someone actually read the notes on my account and then start from there is very helpful. Great customer knowledge, and it feels like they're advocating for me right away. Okay, now that we have talked a little bit about what baggage is, why it's important, let's talk about how you can surface or spot it and how you can acknowledge it. So it's a 3-step process. We'll go through each step individually and talk a little bit about what this looks like in practice. So the first step is to surface. You need to understand or identify where the baggage exists. From a customer's perspective, this is things like asking questions about the previous steps they've taken or to understand past experiences. However, it's not the only place where you can surface baggage. We're going to use an example as we walk through these 3 steps from the financial services industry. You can see that there is actually a lot of available information to our fictitious customer service rep over here on the left-hand side of the page. Now, they may be seeing some of this information in systems, so notes taken by reps based on previous interactions with this customer. It could be information that they're receiving from the IVR, so based on the selection that the customer has chosen in the menu about why they're calling today. Maybe the recent fraudulent activity was passed on through the IVR. They can also surface baggage information by listening to what the customer is saying and asking some follow-up questions. So step 1, surfacing that information, using all of your available resources, including the customer, to better understand what possible baggage exists. Once you know what the baggage is, the next step is acknowledging and demonstrating to the customer that you understand their situation. Now, we talked earlier about how some baggage feels a little bit scary to address. And interestingly, what we find is that actually you don't need to address all baggage. There are a couple of considerations that you can use when determining which pieces of baggage are most important to address. So back to our financial services example here, our rep is going to think about two key considerations when they are evaluating which pieces of information over there on the left might be worthy of acknowledging. So the first consideration is recency. Has this issue happened recently to this customer? So you may see some notes about a particularly bad service experience that happened a year ago, or maybe something that happened 2 weeks ago. There's a big difference in terms of which of those you may want to acknowledge and which of those you may want to just leave alone. So factor one, recency. Factor number two, impact. So has this had a high impact for this customer? And again, it's in the eye of the beholder. The key here is the impact for the customer, not whether or not you think that it was a big impact, but whether it was a big impact to them. So for example, if a customer mentions that your service failure ultimately cost me $5, well, in the grand scheme of things, that may not seem like a big impact to you, but the fact that the customer is bringing it up and is being specific about the impact that it had to them means that it was a big deal to them. And that's definitely something that we would want to acknowledge. So based on those filters, the recency and the impact, our customer service representative here is going to take all of those pieces of information that they surfaced on the left, they're going to put it through those filters, and what they're going to end up with is a smaller set of information or potential sources of baggage that they should be acknowledging as they work through the customer's resolution process. So now that we know what the baggage was and which pieces we should acknowledge, the last step is really in demonstrating the advocacy and ownership while you're acknowledging it. So taking a larger relationship with the company into consideration, and again, making the customer feel like they were treated the way that they thought they deserved to be treated. Now, how exactly do you do that? Well, part of it is going to have to come from you naturally. It's going to have to be a process of you deciding authentically to me, what does acknowledging baggage sound like? We've provided a couple of sample responses here. These are certainly a good place to start, but we would encourage you to think through what makes sense for you. But just as an example, you could start with something like, I hear you've tried XYZ, is that correct? Or I'm going to own this issue today and take care of it. I will be sure to pass along your comments. I know you're a valued customer. So these are sample ways that reps can start to acknowledge and handle customer baggage in a way that's really demonstrating a lot of advocacy and ownership for the customer's issue. You'll know if you're getting it right when you hear the customer responding with something that sounds like relief. So the customer should feel like a weight has been lifted, like this burden that they've been carrying around has been assumed by somebody else, by you. And so you can see some samples here about what that might sound like from the customer's perspective. I haven't had anyone who's taken the time to understand everything I've gone through. I feel good that this is finally going to get resolved now. I'm glad we got to the bottom of this. So you can almost really just hear the relief in these quotes that the customer feels like you are finally going to solve their problem. So just in closing, I'll leave you with a quick summary of what we discussed and then a couple of suggestions for next steps. So just as a reminder, customer baggage is their past experiences, perceptions, or facts that occurred before the interaction. These things do not necessarily have to relate to the issue at hand, but they can influence the way the customer feels about the resolution process. As you think about how a rep can handle baggage, remember that there are 3 steps. The first is to know what the baggage is, to surface it. You can find that information in a couple of different places. There are systems, ticketing systems or CRM, where you can look at notes on past experiences. You can listen using your active listening skills. You can also ask some strategic questions using a skill called purposeful small talk. Once you've surfaced that baggage, the next key is knowing which pieces to acknowledge. Remember, we talked about 2 filters, recency and impact, as a way to determine which pieces of baggage to acknowledge. And then finally, you should demonstrate advocacy and ownership as a way to move forward positively with this customer. So, how can you put this into action? Here's going to be my parting advice to you. A couple of things you can do. You can take a screenshot of this or jot down some notes, but a couple of quick things that you can start to do to get going with baggage handling. Step 1, I would suggest to brainstorm 3 common types of baggage your customers have, because this looks different from company to company. So the baggage that a financial services company might have is different than baggage a technology company might have. Think about what might be common to your customers, but remember, 92% of them have baggage when they are contacting you. Consider how you can surface those types of baggage. So how will you know when this baggage exists? Will you look in notes? Will you be able to hear it in what the customer is saying? Or are there specific questions you might need to ask them to surface that baggage? Now write a sample response. How will you acknowledge the baggage? What is that going to sound like to you? Once you've done those first 3 things, the next step, of course, is to practice. So step 4, practice on your next several customer interactions. Once you've had a chance to practice, share your results with your team, with your supervisor. Talk a little bit about what worked, what was hard, and what would you do differently next time. This is going to be a skill that you have to practice over time, and you will get better at it. It will feel more natural. One really crucial way to improving skills is by talking about them with people who are also trying to do them. So definitely take that last step in sharing your results with your team and your supervisor. And that's it from me today. Again, thank you so much for joining our tutorial on baggage handling. I hope it's been valuable for you, and we'll see you again soon.